Hello and welcome to episode 86 of this podcast we call Two Chairs Talking. My name, as always, is Perry Middlemas. I'm here, also, as always, with my erudite friend David Grigg. Hello, David.
Hi. We should get you to change your name by deed poll in between so you can say something different, next time.
Oh, no, I've, no.
You're pretty happy with your name as it stands?
Well, names are one of those funny things, when you're younger, you sort of think, no, you don't really like it very much. And later on, when you realise that it's rather uncommon, you actually think, yeah, people could find me. I mean, just the one thing about it is that I find it weird when people say, so what's your email address and where are you? And I said, just do a Google search. You'll be able to find me.
Fair enough.
I'm easy enough to find. There aren't all that many around. There was another Perry Middlemas in Ottawa who died a couple of years back. I was actually hoping that I was going to get over there and have a chance to meet him, but he died before I could get to Canada.
That's
so
a pity.
But unfortunate. But
there are lots of David Griggs around, I can tell you that. So
oh yeah, well, see that's you got a common,
including an agricultural economist who's written tons of books. So if you sort of hunt for books by David Grigg, well, they'll all come up about the agrarian revolution in 17th century Britain, that sort of stuff.
Oh God, that's a bit dry.
It's pretty dry.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you never know though. It might be an absolutely fascinating read.
Sure
you probably come across stuff that you think, I've never knew that. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Now my life is complete. I don't think so.
No.
Somehow, I don't think so.
No.
But you never know. You're lucky in the big city, David.
Anyway, it's interesting.
But have you read any? You think?
No, I haven't read any of David Grigg's agricultural economics books. No.
Oh, okay. I
should
get
probably
one out of
hunt
the
them
library
up
and have a bit of a perusal and see what it's like, and get in contact with him and say, cease and desist, or something like that. No,
never mind.
We don't want to do that. But look, it's just interesting. Names are good. It's just useful having for me, I find it useful having a rather unusual name. Although a lot of people struggle with it, and I get called everything under the sun, from Kerry and Terry and anyway. You just have to. I don't get too precious about it. I just sort of say, no, the name's Perry with a P, and that's it, and I just move on. I mean, I know a lot of people get very upset when we mispronounce names, and if we do, we humbly apologise. We do it because, and I'm bound to do it in this particular episode, we do it because we haven't come across the names very much. And the ones that I really struggle with, I do try to have a look at. There's a pronunciation guide on Google that you can put a name into and it'll tell you how to pronounce it. And you try to do those as best you can, but sometimes you even forget, because it's quite astounding how when you hear a name or read a name, the very first method that your brain says this is how it should be pronounced, it's very hard to break out of that. Yeah. You just get that into your head, and it seems like it's sort of etched into the concrete of your brain, and it's hard to get that around to the correct way of doing things. So, blanket apology all the way right across the board. If we make some mistakes today, we apologise. Yep. That's just the way it is.
Okay.
Which leads us actually into news. Because we do have a bit of news on the literary field and a couple of other things. And so I'll start off, if you like, and with the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards, which were released just in the last couple of weeks, I think. Yep. The Fiction Award was won by Jessica Owl for her novella Cold Enough for Snow. I actually reviewed that on the podcast last year, and while I was impressed with the writing, I just didn't think it went anywhere. It's a story about a Australian woman of Asian descent who catches up with her mother after not having seen her for some number of years, and they decide to go on a holiday together to Japan. And they meet up in Japan, and then it's just the discussion about what they learn about each other. And I just didn't really think that the main character changed very much from the start of the novella to the end. I mean, as I said, I thought it was very, very well written, but anyway, there we go. Different strokes. It's the good thing about this, David, it's short.
Yes.
As a novella, it's very short. Poetry Award was won by At the Altar of Touch by Gavin Yuan Gao. Non-fiction was won by Ida. See, I told you I was going to make mistakes. Ida Goodardin for Root and Branch, Essays on Inheritance. Young adult literature, which you may know this, We Who Hunt the Hollow by Kate Murray.
Yeah, I haven't read that yet, no.
Okay, all right, put that one on your list, David, because you're the big young adult man.
I would say I'm more a middle school man, actually. You're sort of middle grade.
Okay, so it's probably middle school. But I think, so young adult, maybe we should talk about that at some stage in terms of the definition.
I think young adult we should talk about it. I think young adult is a specific thing in itself, which there are particular tropes and approaches that books labelled as YA get, I think, which, I don't know. It is an interesting issue, but this is not the time to discuss it.
No, but we should go into it a little bit more at some other time, and maybe we'll put that down for a later discussion. Yep. Indigenous Writing, The Upwelling by Lystra Rose. And overall, what they do with the Victorian Premiers Awards is they get all of the category winners, and then they decide who is going to pick up the Victorian Prize for Literature, and that was won by Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Owl. And that, as I said, I gave that about 3.3 out of 5. She's done very well with it. Good luck. I'll be interested to see what she does next, if she decides to do something next, because she picked up over $120,000 for the prizes in this particular set of awards. So she may decide to take a bit of time off. David.
Put her feet up.
Hopefully,
who knows?
Well, hopefully, if she published the novella sometime last year, that theoretically she should have been working on something. What is it? The general idea is you never send something out for a submission until you've got the next one started, so that you've got something rolling all the time. So you don't sit back and go, well, I'll see how that one went, and then start writing something else. No. Just keep going. Just keep moving on. Yep. So anyway, that's a good bunch of titles that we've picked up from the Victorian Premiers Literary Award. Now, the other big bit of news, this time in the genre, science fiction and fantasy genre area, is that the Locus recommended reading list for 2022 has been released and is available for free, that you can have a look at it and see it on their website, and we'll put a link in the show notes regarding that. But if you just look up Locus magazine, and you'll find it right at the very top, because it's the big thing for February. And there's a fair number of Australians on this list, David, a lot more than I thought there would be, because normally you get sort of one or two if you're lucky. So that's pretty good. And don't forget here that we're dealing with categories like Best SF Novel, Best Fantasy, Best Horror, Best YA, Best First Novel, Anthology Collection, Novella, Novelette, Short Story, Best Non-Fiction, Best Associated, Best Art, just goes on and on and on and on. There's large numbers, but they cover everything in the field. And you look at it and you think, we're very, very lucky that this has been running for as long as it has, because it gives us each year a good solid chunk of information about what the SF and fantasy fields are doing in a particular year. I can't find anything similar in the crime fiction or mystery or thriller areas. And, that would be really good to be able to have something like that. So if you had you have to sort of cobble it together from all the different awards. You have to get, if you want the best PI novel, the best espionage novel, the best mystery, the best thriller, the best cozy, all the different categories that they might have for that, and best novel, you can't find it anywhere. You have to get it all together. Here, with Locus, the science fiction and fantasy genre, you get the whole lot all in one particular place, which is great. And I hardly recommend that people support this, because it's a wonderful magazine and it's really, really very, very useful. Anyway, back to the Australians on the list, David. Best SF novel, Mage of Fools by Eugen Bacon. Now, Eugen Bacon is a African-Australian novelist who I'd heard a bit about, but not a lot, and then I went and looked her up in the last couple of days. By crikey, she's written quite a lot of work. So I'll have to start checking some of that out. There's a new novella just come out from them, and I'll have just ordered that. In fact, it's being published tomorrow. So I've got it on pre-order, and it'll be turning up tomorrow. So hopefully I'll be able to review that shortly. Best fantasy novel, The Path of Thorns by Angela Slatter. Best novella, The Bone Lantern by Angela Slatter. She's been around for quite some time and is well known in the field. Best collection, there's two. Chasing Whispers by Eugene Bacon again, and Hard Places by Kirsten McDermott. Best anthology, two of them, edited by Jonathan Strawn from Perth. First one, Someone in Time, Tales of Time-Cross Romance, and Tomorrow's Party's Life in the Anthropocene. And Best Non-Fiction, An Earnest Blackness by Eugene Bacon. So that's 3 entries she's got. And Story Matrices, Cultural Encoding and Cultural Baggage in the Worlds of Science Fiction and Fantasy by Gillian Pollock. That wins the award for longest title for this particular year. So that's a good range of Australian SF and fantasy and related material in the recommended list. But as I said, I would recommend that people go and have a bit of a look at it. It's got links off to a number of the shorter stories, novelettes and short stories that take you off to the original internet magazine printing of them, and you can read them for free. And if you like the particular magazine that those stories are in, you can subscribe, of course, and help them continue to produce material. Unfortunately, there weren't any Australian authors in the shorter fictions, novelette and short stories. Occasionally there are, but there weren't this year. So anyway, so it's a good bunch of stuff, and there may well be more in that particular list because it's so long. There's generally 30 SF novels recommended, 30 fantasy, 15 to 20 horror, 15 to 20 YA, 20, 25 first novels. When you get down to short stories, there's like 60 or 70. So it just shows you the wide range and depth of material that's been published every year in the genre. It's quite large, and it's there's just a heck of a lot of it. The standard refrain is, David, you just can't keep.
No, impossible.
That's it. You just can't. But you do the best you can. And in some ways, that people wonder why they ask me, well, why do you concentrate on the awards so much? Well, the reason why I concentrate on the awards is it gives me a little bit of a slice of the best of the year. It may not be the best, but it gives me a bit of a slice, and it gives me an opportunity to come across names that I may not know previously, which might take me back to the recommended list where I can have a bit of a look and see, what's this person done in the past, and then I can read some of that because the links are still there. You can still go and read it, and it gives you a bit of an opportunity to find out what's actually happening in the field, because I can't read everything. And I've got to have somebody helping me bring the number of options in a particular category down to something manageable, and the awards is really probably about the best way of doing that.
Sure.
Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention before we go on to the main part of this particular episode, David, is that to discuss a little bit about the 2023 World Science Fiction Convention, which, as you know, is going to be held in Chengdu, China this year. Since the beginning of the year, there's been a few announcements that have caused a bit of consternation in the SF and fantasy fields. Firstly, they've changed the dates. They moved it from mid-late August now to the 18th to the 22nd of October. And they've also changed the venue. It's still in the same city, but they've changed the venue from the convention centre where they were going to hold it over to the Chengdu Science Fiction Museum, which sounds really interesting. It sounds like a really good thing and really good place to hold it. There's only one problem. It's still under construction.
Oh, dear.
And this is never a good thing to have. Most people are basically saying, well, the Chinese have got a good reputation for being able to get things up and done really quickly because they throw huge numbers of people at it, which is fine, but it sort of leads you to think, this is may cause a few problems. There's also a bit of ructions at the moment because they're saying that the call for the Hugo Award nominations, which allows everybody who's a member of the convention and even the member of last year's convention in Chicago to be able to nominate across any of the Hugo Award categories, they haven't opened as yet. And I read a report this morning that even if they were open today, that would make them the latest of any convention in the last 15 years. To give people a bit of an idea, in 2010 at AussieCon 4, we opened the Hugo nomination period for a convention in early September. We opened the nomination period on January the 1st. Just because we had it all set up, ready to roll, and it was January the 1st. Nothing else was going to get published in 2009. Had to be done then, and off we went. So we were able to get it out early, but unfortunately, they seem to be having a bit of trouble here, which is not really all that flash. So there's a few ructions there about what's going on, but we keep an open mind and hope and pray that they will be able to get things together in time and deliver a good convention. We never want to see a Worldcon fail in any country, anywhere, and we hope it's successful. But I've made a firm decision that I won't be going. I had thought that I would, but I'm certainly not going. I think that the COVID situation is still too fraught, especially in China. And with that large number of people, there's going to be very large numbers of people wandering around with COVID. And I don't reckon you're going to be able to avoid it some way or other. So I'm just going to steer clear of the whole thing. Unfortunate. I was looking forward to going, but just can't do it. There we are. So that's my news. Yep. Have you got any?
I don't think I've got any news, no. At least nothing I've researched.
All right. Okay. Well, that sounds good. So I think we might move on to the main topic of our discussion for today, David, which is my best film and TV of the year.
That's right, because I got nothing.
Yes, you've got nothing.
Well, I've not got entirely nothing, but if it seems pointless choosing the best five out of when I've only seen four things, so it's not worth it. So no,
yes.
I'll make the odd comment as you go through yours.
Okay. Well, I do want to make the comment that I have noticed lately, David, that I'm following your suggestion when I'm watching film and television, especially, well, TV, of course, on TV, but films on the television. I do actually now like to have the subtitles up going all the time, because I'm finding that a lot of the audio is either muffled or muddy, and I don't know what's going on.
Well, we're also getting deaf, Perry.
Well, speak for yourself.
I know that I am.
Well, I know you are. You've said that, and you're fully aware of it. I haven't actually noticed it. Although, of course, my higher registers are basically they've gone. But as you would expect as you get older. But I don't know that I'm that bad. But I'm just finding some of it hard to follow, and sometimes some of the accents are hard to follow. And then also you get some television programs, because they are becoming more international now. You're now actually getting people coming in who will suddenly burst into a bit of French or German or Russian, and without the subtitles, you go, what was all that about? Maybe that was really important to the plot. Having it as the subtitles, it sort of gets over that problem straight away. So there's a tip for young players there. David, use the subtitles. Never hurts. Anyway, my year in film, I didn't actually see as many films as I thought that I actually had. I watched 35 in the year, and the major thing that I did this year was get back to watching more in the cinema. which I'm really glad about, because I do actually like watching a film on a big screen. I know you have a problem with this because of the sound, but I really like being able to go to a cinema and sit there and watch it. And being a retired gentleman means I can go during the day. And as happened with the film that I have as my number one of the year, myself and my companion, who happened to be Chong on that particular day, were the only two in the audience in the whole of the cinema, which is, and it wasn't a big cinema, but it was big enough. And so that was a weird experience when you go midday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and there's nobody else around. Mm-hmm. It's really quite strange. It feels like you're in your own private screening theatre, and it's interesting. So anyway, 35 films, down 5 on the previous year. Maybe I was watching more on the streaming in 21 as opposed to 22, but there we go. Well, I'm not terribly sure. I didn't quite go down to that level of detail. I'm not a stats nut as much as you are, David. I know you like to extract every bit of ounce of statistical juice out of all your data from your reading for the year. I didn't do that with this, but anyway. So look, I'll get into my top 5 films for the year, sure, and explain how we go. My 5th best was a film called The Stranger, directed by Thomas N. Wright from 2022. This was on Netflix, and I gave this one 4.2 out of 5. This is an Australian rural noir film streaming on Netflix, which involves a large and complex police sting set up to catch a child killer. It's slow, it's creepy, it's dark and disturbing, but it's really well written and well acted. And it's the best Australian movie I've seen in quite some time. It's actually based on a real life case of a young boy who went missing by the side of the road. Was picked up by somebody and was never seen again up in Queensland. And so it sort of follows that particular case. They've changed all of the names and changed the timings so that it's only loosely adapted from it. I know that the parents of the young boy that went missing were very upset that it was being made and didn't want it made. So they tried to make it, it's not about the boy going missing, it's about the sting to catch the actual killer. And it's really, it's quite an excellent film. It's slow and it's calm, but it gets there in the end, and the major actors that are involved in this are really, really, really good. And I thought it was wonderful. Mm. Number 4, Maigret. This is a new Maigret film directed by Patrice Leconte from 2022. I gave this one 4.3. And Maigret, I'm guessing, is a role that every major French actor would like to play. And for this one, the major actor is Gerard Depardieu. It seems that it's a role that he's particularly grown into because he actually makes jokes about how big and fat he is, and but it suits it. Now, I know that a lot of people think that Depardieu is he's a bit of a odious person in many ways. He's a Putin apologist, and I think he's taken Russian citizenship. But this is one of those questions of, do you look at the art or do you look at the person? In this instance, I'm looking at the art. He's absolutely wonderful in this role. There's no getting over the fact that Depardieu is a wonderful actor. And this is a version of Maigret which is absolutely fantastic. It got about, I don't know, a week, 10 days worth of screenings in Melbourne, and that was it. It was only in selected cinemas, and so it was hard to find, but my wife and I went to see it on a Sunday afternoon and really enjoyed it. I believe it's now on one of the streaming services, maybe Netflix, Prime, not sure. But if people wanted to see it, they could, and I suggest they do. Putting aside the fact that, of course, Depardieu is in it, but he actually makes it, so it's a real bit of a problem, that film. But anyway, I'd suggest people see it. Number 3, is a documentary called Harvest Time, directed by Neil Young from 2022. I gave this one 4.5. Now, this is a recording about Neil Young's album Harvest in 1971. There's no commentary, and there's no recent fix-ups. The quality of the film is at times fairly poor, but the sound is pretty good. I reckon they might have tweaked the sound a bit, but not the actual video visuals. But this is one of those documentaries about a recording of an album. And if you don't like Neil Young and you don't like this particular music, I can't see how you can really enjoy this film, other than to say, well, I'm going to look at it as just a way that somebody goes through the process of actually making a particular film. I think that if you don't like Neil Young, you'll find this tedious. I like Neil Young. I like this particular album, and therefore I like this documentary quite a lot. In fact, Harvest was the very first album I bought back in about 1972. And so I was really looking forward to seeing this. It's the 50th anniversary of the release of that particular album. Neil Young, as he is at the moment, appears at the very beginning of this documentary as a brief introduction of about 2 or 3 minutes. And he looks incredibly and sheepish over the whole thing. It's almost like he's almost apologetic for doing this. And then he stands outside of his barn with the door and holds the record up and says a few things about the actual album. And then he walks through the door and closes it. And that's it. And you don't see him again, and then just cuts back to what it was in 1972. I liked it. It was a once-off screening, so I had to go and see it on a particular night, but enjoyed it, really enjoyed it. Number 2, my favourite science fiction film of the year. In fact, the most fun I had in any film in this particular year in 1922, and that's Everything Everywhere All at Once, directed by the Daniels. I gave this one 4.5. This is one of those numbers at 4.5 that every time I think about it, I think, should it have been higher? I think maybe I should have bumped this a little bit. I just found this to be just a huge amount of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Massive amounts. And it blows those Marvel Cinematic Universe films out of the water. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It pokes fun at itself. There's lots of things going on in the background. And it's got talking rocks, David. Talking rocks.
It has talking rocks.
With goggle eyes. I mean, that's fantastic stuff.
Yeah. No,
it's just fun. If you go into this thinking, oh, this is going to be a serious one and it's got to do all the right things, you'll hate it. But if you just go in and go, well, I hear it's a mind blast, let's just go with it. And the first 5 or 10 minutes you go, what the hell's going on? What's happening here? These people are basically running this laundrette and getting into trouble with the IRS, and you don't know what's going on. They have to go down to the taxation, and suddenly things start just expanding, blowing up, and suddenly it's like it's pretty damn good. And now you said you've seen this.
I saw it this year. I saw it a couple of weeks ago because it came on Amazon Prime, I think, and so I have seen it. And I agree entirely with everything you've said. Great movie.
It's just a great lot of fun, and don't take it too seriously, and just go with the flow and just let it go over the top of you. If you haven't seen it, it is going to be. Here you are, David. I'll tell you this. It's going to win. It's going to win the Hugo Award for best film in Chengdu.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
I'm not a betting man, but I'd put 5 cents on it. I reckon, and I think that it's got absolutely. It's just going to win because it's just that good. It's got a mainly Asian cast, which is also going to be good stand in China. But it's good just to see these other stories, isn't it? And seeing things like the metaverse and the concept of the chosen one handled very differently. You are the only one. Oh, not now, a bit busy. I'm too bit busy at the moment. Can't do this. No. Find somebody else. No. You're it. We've been through all the universes and you're it because you're the biggest failure. Oh, okay, thanks. It's just wonderful. I'm going to have to go back and watch it again this year. I really am because it's just a cracker. I just loved it. So anyway, that was that. But my favourite film of the year is a Japanese Korean film called Drive My Car, directed by Ryosuke Hamaguchi from 2021, so it was the previous year. It was up for Best Film last year in the Academy Awards and may well have run the Best International Film. I gave this one 4.7, which is pretty high for me. It's 3 hours long, David, and I did not feel that it was that length at all. I was just astounded by how good this drama was. It's a drama about family, loss, regret, redemption, things that you could have done that you didn't do, and how you connect to other people and how you find your place in the world. And I'm sure there's a whole lot of cultural references in this film that I completely missed. I mean, the car is a very bright red, and I'm sure that it means something that I've got no idea why, but it's there all the time, and you keep seeing it, and it's very bright in compared to a sort of slightly washed part of the rest of the film, and you sort of think, no, he's trying to say something here. The director's trying to say something, but I don't know what the hell it is, but I still like it. I thought it was the closest thing to a full-rounded novel I saw on film all year. I thought it was excellent.
Well, that's interesting because it's based on a short story, isn't it, by Haruki Murakami. I'm a big Murakami fan, by the way.
Yes, it is, and so it's got massive literary kudos sitting behind it, and a lot of good chops sitting behind it. If you can find it anywhere, David, I suggest
I must see that.
You won't have a problem about it because you have to watch it with subtitles, so you won't have to worry about listening to the dialogue. Excellent film, really, really good film. And that was the one that I sat in, and after about an hour or so, and I was looking around and I realised there was nobody there, I said to Chomp, we can actually discuss this film as we go, can't we? He said, yeah. So we did. We had a bit of a chat every now and again. What does that mean? I don't know. What does that mean? Oh, yeah, okay. Anyway, so you say a few things there when you can, and that's all right. So that's my best films of the year.
Excellent.
So that's those. Now, honourable mentions. I'll give a few honourable mentions to this. Coda, directed by Sian Heder, H-E-D-E-R, from 2021. This won the best film last year at the Academy Awards. I didn't think it was anywhere near as good as Drive My Car. I gave this one 4. Still good, but not as good as I thought it would be. In fact, all of my honourable mentions get 4.0, so I won't bother about listing those. Being the Ricardos, directed by Aaron Sorkin. This is a film with Nicole Kidman as Lucille Ball, and deals with the machinations behind the scenes of I Love Lucy. I enjoyed it. I thought it was very well done. North by Northwest, directed by Alfred Hitchcock from 1959. I don't think we need to say anything about this one, other than the fact that I think it's one of my favourite Hitchcock films. There's a couple of scenes where are really hokey, and you sort of look at it, oh, okay. Especially when you have trains going into tunnels at various times, being a bit of sexual innuendo, and really trying to get knocked down by a crop duster out in the middle of nowhere. No, come on, there's better ways of doing things than that. Anyway, I still like it. I like it because it's one of those examples of wrong man in the wrong place. He just happens, Cary Grant just happens to stand up at just the wrong time when somebody is trying to track down somebody, and this person's name's called, and he puts his hand up and asks for the messenger because he wants to send a telegraph. But the guys that are searching for the man that they have, whose name has been called out, notice that he put his hand up and just assume that that's him, and then it's a problem and he's off. But anyway,
good film.
Good film. No Sudden Move, directed by Steven Soderbergh from 2021. This is a sort of a pseudo-noir crime film on streaming, which I quite enjoyed. I thought it was great. And I rewatched Moneyball, directed by Bennett Miller from 2011, the Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill film about baseball, about the Oakland Athletics and how they attempted to change the way that baseball was played and how players for the team were chosen. Quite excellent. And my son dropped in and saw it, and he was watching it the other night, so I sat down and watched about another half hour of it again. I really quite like the film. I think it's very well done. It's based on a book by Michael Lewis, and I can recommend that book as well. Even though it is about baseball, it's more about people management and about how you identify what people excel in, and how you have to try and change the general community's perception of how things should be done. You know, just because things have been done the same way all the time doesn't mean to say that's the best way of doing it. There may be other ways of doing things, and you have to be open to be able to do things in a large project like a baseball team over a very long sporting season. So, excellent stuff. So that's my film for the year, those 5. I won't go on any further. I think I've gone on quite enough. So I'll talk about TV now. As you can tell, see it all on TV, so I don't see it on the cinema. But anyway, TV documentaries. The best of the TV documentaries for me was The Beatles, Get Back, on Disney Plus. I gave this one 4.7 because I really, really enjoyed this. 3-hour episodes. Wonderful stuff. Absolutely wonderful. Yes, it's long, but it's just astoundingly good. Fly on the wall, look at the recording of an album that they made, Get Back, and the subsequent concert up on the top of the roof of the Abbey Road Studios in London from 1969. You can actually see the Beatles slowly breaking up in front of you as at one stage George Harrison walks out, and the rest of the other 3 have to go and persuade him to come back, and how they tried to keep it all together long enough for them to be able to finish the album rather, and it's quite excellent. Now, last year I had a whole section devoted to food documentaries because I saw a lot of them. This year I didn't watch a single one, so I didn't watch any series based on food. I watched snippets, but I didn't individual episodes here and there. But I didn't watch any whole series going all the way right through. So maybe I'll have to get it back into that again. So there's no honourable mentions for the TV documentaries. TV comedy. So I only watched 3 seasons of TV comedies, and all 3 of them I thought were excellent. Number 3. Midnight Diner, Tokyo Stories, Season 2. This is from 2019 on Netflix. A wonderful set of about 10 episodes, half hour at a time, set in a very small diner with a cast of characters, half of which are in the diner at night after midnight, are standard characters that stay there, and the others are just moving characters that come through. Lots of pathos, lots of bathos, lots of comedy, lots of drama. Good stuff. Really enjoyed it. It's excellent stuff. Number 2, Only Murders in the Building, Season 2 from 2022, Disney Plus, 4.2. I just spoke about Only Murders in the Building. It's got Steve Martin and Martin Short as the 2 main characters, and Selena Gomez, that's right, as the 3rd part of the trio that are investigating murders in this particular apartment building in New York. Last time when I spoke about this, I thought the first season, Selena Gomez, I thought was really not very good in the role, but she's a heck of a lot better this time. I think she just seemed very stilted last time, and this time she just seems to have opened up a bit more. Maybe she's just relaxed a bit more, and it's just thought, I can just do this, and just starts talking as she normally would. And she comes across a heck of a lot better. Enjoyed this one. Number 1, Detectorists, Season 2 from 2015 on Netflix. I love this. Couple of guys that are just floating around out in the fields with their metal detectors in southern England. And it's just how they interact with each other and with the communities they deal with. It's almost like science fiction fandom, David. They're basically these detectorists, and you go through this and you watch it all and you think, I can see a lot of similarities here with a lot of fanish communities of any ilk. Wonderful stuff, and I can hardly recommend it. The Detectorists, I believe, is can now consider to be one of the top dozen or so English or British television comedy series of all time. And I can understand why it's wonderful. Really, 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 really good. TV drama, number 5, Bosch Season 7. This is the most recent season based on the Michael Connelly novels about Hieronymus Bosch, who was a police homicide detective and had a falling out with the powers that be, the upper hierarchy of the LAPD, and has now moved out to becoming a private detective. Titus Welliver is in the lead role. Excellent choice for this particular character it starts off basically as a police procedural and then moves into a PI style television series, and we don't get very many of those these days. It used to be really common on TV in the 70s, 60s, 70s and 80s, and not so much anymore. This is really good. You get some really interesting views of LA that you don't normally see, which is good. Number 4, The Staircase. I saw this on Foxtel. It's on Binge. It's around. This is a TV series based on a real life murder case where the wife, played by Toni Collette, is found dead at the bottom of the stairs. The police, the husband finds her at the bottom of the stairs. Colin Firth rings the police. The police turn up. They look at it and they arrest him for murder because they believe he's beaten her to death, although they can't find the murder weapon. But they say that all the blood splatter and all the rest of it looks as though he's beaten her to death with a fire poker or something, although they can't find it. This is as I said, it's a real life case. And what happens later on is that a French documentary team have just finished a project and they hear about this particular case and decide that they would like to do an investigation of the US justice system. And so they get permission to follow along with the investigation, and then going into the trial, and I'm not giving anything away because this is real life and you can look it up. By the end of the first episode, Colin Firth has been arraigned and charged with murder. He's then put on in remand until he waits till his trial happens, and it follows all the way right through the trial, and then follows, he gets convicted, he's in jail, and then he's staying in jail. The documentary crew is following him a bit. Then he decides to appeal because they found out some of the prosecution evidence was a bit funky, and that they think they've got grounds for an appeal. Wonderful stuff. Really, really good. You end up getting the filmmakers give you 3 different versions of what might have happened to the female character who dies, and you get all 3 of those. One of them was that she actually does fall down the stairs and hits her head, and then gets up and falls again, and slips in her own blood and falls again and hits her head again. Another is that he beats her to death, and another is that she gets attacked by an owl outside, and that's where some of the cuts come from in her head, which they weren't able to explain. The film does not come down on one side or the other in terms of his guilt or his innocence. You have to work that out for yourself. And it changes. Your view of it changes. For a while there you think, yeah, he absolutely utterly did this. And then you think, no, he didn't. And then, yes, he did. No, he didn't. And Colin Firth has a secret life as well because he's bisexual. So he has these sexual encounters with men in gyms and down back alleys. And so there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Wonderfully done, well written, beautifully acted. Really, really good stuff. Number 3, The Bear, Season 1. This is on Disney+. This is about a young chef who returns from New York to Chicago to take over his family's sandwich shop when his older brother commits suicide. and it's what happens as he attempts to bring the sandwich shop up to a level of culinary expertise. And it's the stuff that goes on in the background, the machinations about what happens. It's very squarey, which I thought was very weird for Disney Plus. I wouldn't have thought they had this. But it's wonderful. It's a real fly-on-the-wall stuff behind the scenes. The stress, the tension and the pressure about what happens inside a small restaurant. And by sandwich shop, I don't mean, the sandwich shops that we have, David. These are the sandwich shops where they have slow cooked pork that they've cooked for 18 hours that they pull apart, and that everybody, all the fillings are just sort of absolutely phenomenal. And this is high level culinary art that they're having to do to be able to get things to the level that they want, and all the machinations that he has to go through to ensure that the restaurant stays afloat, because his brother was very bad at keeping his books properly. Excellent stuff. Hardly recommended. Number 2, Dublin Murders, Season 1. This is based on the
Tana French.
Tana French, Into the Woods. I think it's based on the first 2 novels my wife told me. She's read all of them, and so it sort of conflates the 2 of them together, brings them all in, and intertwines the stories that all go together. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was very well handled, very well done. I won't give anything away because
the books are excellent. Yeah.
Yes, so I believe, and they've got very, very good, good reputations. I think Into the Woods won one of the major American awards for best first novel of the year when it came out some time ago, about 10, 12 years ago.
About that one,
yeah, about that, and good stuff, and hardly recommend it. And that was on SBS On Demand. I think it may have disappeared from there, but if you can track it down, I suggest you do so. My number 1 drama of the year, Succession Season 2. This is really it's based on the Murdoch media empire succession problems. I'm absolutely certain of it. If anybody says it's not, they're only saying that so they don't get sued. I think that it is, and it's wonderful. Brian Cox, the actor rather than the astronomer, Brian Cox in the lead role as the matriarch, and all the people underneath. Underneath him, the family, his sons and daughter, who are trying to manipulate each other and work out who's going to end up taking over the whole thing, and he just doesn't want to give it up. And he comes across as it's a beautiful piece of acting by Brian Cox, because he comes across as a dictatorial pain in the ass, but he does it so well with such bravado and such energy, and you sort of think, my God, you'd be scared of him as soon as you walked in the door. If you got on the wrong side of him, you're history, basically. You're just going to get cleaned up. So all good stuff, and I can hardly recommend it. So they're my final categories, because I didn't have all that many different categories to put them into. I just put them that way. So my best overall, from 5 down to 1, were The Staircase, The Bear Season 1, Dublin Murders Season 1. Number 2 was Succession Season 2, and number 1, The Beatles Get Back, which I thought was the best piece of television I saw all year.
Yeah, it is terrific. Yeah.
Yeah, and really hardly recommend people go and watch that. I think that you'll get a lot out of it, and you'll learn a lot about what music was like back in the late 1960s.
The thing which struck me about it was that it just shows you them inventing these songs on the fly. This starts out with Paul humming something and throwing some nonsense lyrics to it. And it's just about the creative process. I think that's what I think came to me out of watching that. So it's very, very.
And
good.
the idea that if you can't think of the right word, just put a word in that's got the right number of syllables, and then figure it out later. But you just move it, just keep it moving. Don't put it aside because you can't work out, you can't get it perfect. Just keep it going, keep on working it, keep on adding it. And it's, as you say, it's wonderful. You see one or two songs get developed right from, as you say, practically nothing all the way right through to the finished product, and when they end up on the actual album, wonderful piece of fly on the wall documentary stuff. Fantastic. Yep. Right. Well, that's me done for film and television. So we were going to talk then about what you've been up to over the last 12 months, because you obviously haven't been watching any film or TV very much.
Not very much, no. Well, I've read a lot of books, but we talk about our books all the time. I suppose the other thing which is worth talking about is that my volunteer work, which we have talked about on the podcast, the volunteer work I do for Standard Ebooks. Standard Ebooks it's a volunteer organisation which produces high-quality classic books in the public, which have entered the public domain, or which have been in the public domain for a long time. But what's interesting is that each year now, more new books drop into the US public domain. But the Americans have got this very strange system of what they consider to be the public domain. Like in most of the world, it's a certain number of years after the author or the creator has died that books that they've written enter into the public domain, which is a kind of sensible system. You sort of think, well, if it's 50 years after an author has died, any royalties and so on are probably passed on to their children by now. It's now time to make this more available to the public. And it used to be in Australia, it used to be 50 years after the death of the author, and I think it was the same in the UK. But the Americans had this strange period when there was a lot of lobbying of Congress, and I think mainly from big organisations like Disney, to say, oh, hang on, no, we don't want some of our stuff entering into the public domain so quickly. And there was a law passed which got dubbed the Mickey Mouse Law, because it literally was protecting the first material that featured Mickey Mouse from entering the public domain, and they sort of stopped it. But eventually they reached a point where that law no longer applied, and that because of the dysfunction of the American Congress, they haven't bothered passing a new law, and so they're now back into a system where works enter into the public domain each year. New books enter into the public domain. So each year comes by, there's a new set of books appears into the public domain. And what we do at Standard Ebooks is, as well as all the older books that we're constantly producing, we keep an eye out for what books are going to be entering into the public domain, what new books are going to be entering the public domain. So this year we produced a whole bunch of books which just dropped into the public domain. I'll just list them very quickly. The Big Four by Agatha Christie. Sir Percy Hits Back by Baroness Orczy, I think that's how you pronounce it. Scarlet Pimpernel stuff, good stuff that's now into the public domain. Unnatural Death, which is the third book in the Lord Peter Wimsey series by Dorothy L. Sayers. That was one of the books I produced for them. The Story of Ivy by Marie Belloc Lowndes, I don't know that one. Elmer Gantry by Sinclair Lewis, there was a film made on that, I think. Yeah. The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Tombstone by Walter Noble Burns. Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather. And Ashendon by W. Somerset Maugham, which I think it's a series of spy short stories by Somerset Maugham. So all of those have been entered into the public domain, and we've produced them as high quality ebooks, which you can download for free from standardebooks.org. And I also wanted to add here that the Standard Ebooks is becoming, kind of more and more prestigious in a way, because it's just been accepted by the Library of Congress in the US. They've now produced an online EPUB reader, and in their announcement about that, they announced that they've added 11 books from Standard Ebooks, versions of classic works, which they describe as a project producing high-quality open-access editions of public domain classic books as EPUB files.
That's good news.
So I produced the Dorothy Sayers, and I actually also produced the previous book in the series. I've produced all of the books so far by Dorothy Sayers in the Standard Ebooks catalogue. So that keeps me busy. So that's that. Oh, the one thing I should add is that the American the strange American system is they have a system where you have to register and renew the registration of public domain on certain books, which means that for some reason quite a lot of science fiction books haven't had the copyright renewed, and therefore they've fallen into the public domain, even though the author didn't die 70 years ago. In fact, the Jewels of Aptor by Samuel R. Delany is now in the public domain, and it's being produced for Standard Ebooks. Samuel Delany's still alive. I mean, that just doesn't seem fair.
It's odd.
Doesn't seem
fair.
No,
that doesn't
at all.
No, it doesn't. I don't. I just do not understand that. I think it's a very peculiar way that they've got of doing things. Look, I don't have 75 years after 50 years. I thought was enough, but they moved it to 75. 75 years after the death of the original creator. That's enough. Yeah. Surely. Yeah. And so just move it like that. But it's just odd. It just seems to be weird that the Americans always like to do things slightly differently from everywhere else, and it makes it hard to keep up with. But the old Standard Ebooks is an excellent thing. You can sign up for the newsletter, and you get an indication every month about what new books have been produced by Standard Ebooks, and you can download them. You can subscribe and become a Patreon or pay a certain amount to help them along, which I think is an excellent thing to do. I'm working on a project long-term to actually finish one particular novel, and I've slipped away from it a bit. So this is a bit of a prompt to me to get back and finish that off, David, so that we can get that out sometime later this year.
That'd be good.
And that would be a good thing. It's an Australian SF novel, and we hope to be able to get that finished. I'm about half to two-thirds of the way through it. It's a long, slow process because you have to check the original newspaper serialisation and then check it against the text that you've found, work out what's missing, what's fixed, make comments about why has he called it this way, is this so sometimes you just don't know whether it's a typo by the author or a typo by the newspaper, but you have to bring those up and then discuss it, and then I'm just putting comments in where I sort of see that there's a little bit of a discrepancy here, and I'm going to leave it to my esteemed editor, namely David Grigg, to be able to tell me what he thinks that needs to be done when it gets finished. But we'll let people know when that one's up and going. But I think this is a really wonderful service. The final products are fantastic. They are all proofed and checked by a number of people to ensure that the text is as it should be. The layout's wonderful. The formatting's good. You've picked covers for the books. You've got a standard sort of formatting for the front page, which stands out, and you know as soon as you see that, that's a Standard Ebooks book. And that's, I think, a very good thing to have. I think it just is a wonderful service all the way down the line.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's a lot of fun to do the work for. Although some of the projects can be very hard. I madly agreed to do Boswell's Life of Johnson, and I'm finding that a heck of a strain. But some people do huge books. Like we've got the entire Gibbon Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire came out last year.
Wow.
And all of Pepys' diaries, which is like more than 1 million words. People have produced those for Standard Ebooks, and they're all available for free.
Yep. I mean, this is an astounding piece of work that people are doing here, and it's only to be commended. There's no way that you can criticise this at all. This is just great stuff, and it's a great resource that people can pick up without any problem. Download them, and they're yours to keep, and that's it. Yeah. So it's worthwhile if you're going to end up using it to pitch in a few dollars here and there to help them out. I think it's a excellent project. Indeed. And I wish I had more time to help you out, David. But unfortunately, I've got 10,000 other projects to do. I can't get to. Anyway. It's always a bit of a problem. Yep. Anyway,
okay,
there we go.
Cool.
All right, well, thanks for that discussion about Standard Ebooks. Now, another thing that we were normally do around this time of year is that get in contact with a few of friends of the podcast to ask them what their favourite books were for the previous year. And as we've done for the last couple, I went around last week to Lucy Sussex's residence and had a bit of a chat to her about what her favourite books were for 2022. And here she is. So, Lucy, we're back again for another year, 2022, and our best books of the year.
Another duck, here comes another year, to quote Ogden Nash.
Well, yes, they keep on rolling around all the time, and we like to look back on what it is that we've done in the previous year, just to get a bit of an idea of what it is we read, what we liked, what we didn't. Although we don't really talk about too much about what we didn't like all that much, which is probably a good thing. I think that if you... I'm not big on dumping it on books. I'd rather just ignore them if I didn't actually like them terribly much. That's just my view. Other people might want to go for the idea of getting stuck into them. I don't.
I actually do like a well-written hatchet job, but it's one way to make enemies.
Well, it is, and you really don't want to do it with a first novelist in particular. You want to basically give people a bit of a chance to get a bit of a career behind them before you really get stuck into them. But how was your reading year in 2022? Was it up to standard?
Probably less of it, in that I was finishing up a book, the biography with Megan Brown, co-writing a biography of Mary Fortune, crime writer and wild woman. Also her son George, who was a larrikin and bank robber and safecracker. So that meant that I was necessarily reading 19th century women's history and true crime a lot.
All right.
So when you're writing a book, you don't necessarily want to be influenced, but if you hear about something that you think you ought to read, then you bloody well better read it. So that influenced the reading. I also got some loads of reviewing. Now, with reviewing, you don't necessarily have a choice when, say, you're writing for the for Channel 9, and so you get offered a couple of weeks short fiction form reviewing. You've got no real control over what you're getting, and sometimes you get some stuff that you absolutely love, and sometimes you get stuff that you are iffy about. It's rarer to get the stuff that you absolutely love, but then that said, early last year, Jason Steger, I think, decided to send me some weird stuff. He might deny this, but so I got some stuff that was a little bit out of the ordinary, because he knows I like slightly weird, and that was an interesting exercise. Neither of them, and one of these did make the cut, but as I say, it was a bit of an odd year, and I don't think not much SF and fantasy got read. It's just what happened.
Okay, well, let's move on to your best books from last year, 2022. How do you want to handle this? Do you want to do it in categories, or you want to do top five, or...
What I'll do categories.
All right, okay. So what's first off?
Well, Australiana and realist. And these are not necessarily preferred categories, but I know that good stuff will emerge. And there's two novelists I want to mention, because I got them in context reviewing, and I thought of both that they were going to go on and do really good stuff. The first one was a Fremantle Arts Press book by Maria Pappas called Skimming Stones, and this was about cancer. It's a big topic, but it's actually really hard to write well about cancer. People can't get their distance from it.
Yep.
It's a complex phenomenon, and how do you write about it without hand-wringing or getting too visceral? So
it's also a very personal topic for a lot of people. So
absolutely. So you don't get the distance. Now, what Maria Pappas what made it interesting was she was writing about cancer carers who do not generally get much attention, but if, say, a child's got cancer, then there's a huge burden put upon the family members, and there's a lot of psychological stress, and there's also guilt for the kids who are healthy. So Pappas is writing about a family of two daughters, and one of the daughters gets cancer, and it pretty much destroys the parents' marriage. The father can't cope at all. And then when she grows up, she meets a fellow cancer survivor, in that someone who was in a similar position with their sibling. And they have an affair. It's more than a flingette, it's an affair, but they can't stick together because he's married. But what actually shows that there's cancer description, but there's also description of the natural world, which acts to heal the two protagonists. It runs a huge risk of being mawkish, but instead she manages to avoid that and make it a positive treatment of a subject, and there's a good deal of restraint in this. So I think this is probably going to pick up an award somewhere or other.
Okay, was it published last year?
Yeah, published last year. So I think it's probably going to pick up a WA award.
Okay.
Or a shortlisting. The other one was also WA, from Alan and Unwin. WA content, Emily Brugman, The Islands. And this is something I wouldn't have thought would have come out. And this is again a review book, so I didn't have any control over it. So it's about Finnish migrants to the Hootman Abrolhos. Now, the Hootman Abrolhos are famous for the Batavia, but these are Finnish fisher people who emigrated to Australia post-World War II, and from a famously cold part of Europe, they go somewhere famously hot. And yet Finland's a maritime nation, so that's a good reason. So this is, again, a novel with a really good sense of place, coral cays, seals, and the characters are also very alienated by Australia, and just what it's like in the early 50s, early 60s, very insular culture, and the Finns are regarded as commies, and so they have to consult an encyclopedia to find what the Finns are, and after that they don't say, oh, you're not commies. So Brugman is actually writing up her grandparents' experience, and she creates a family saga of 3 generations. So it does remind me of the Finn family Moomintrolls in a way, if the Moomintrolls had ever got to Australia. But it keeps on making literary references to another Finnish work. That's the Kalevala, pardon my pronunciation, which is a folklore tradition, very ancient. What the book is about is that they're seeking a better life, and they don't necessarily find it, but they find a better life. They find an interesting and different life. I think that this is again one that's an author who's going to go places and has shown a lot of promise, and is worth looking at just for what's happening in Australian literature, because you get like Jessica Au and her book, which has just won the Premier's Literary Award in Australia, which is like 100,000. And this is, again, not your usual Australiana writing, but it's very interesting.
This is Cold Enough for Snow that won the Victorian Premier's Award just recently. Yeah, and
won the big one, 100,000 grand, which, in my humble opinion, is enough to make authors run away and find and invest that loot into something rather more lucrative, but never mind. I mean, some people who have won that award have never heard of again. Anyway, that's just me. Okay, so so I'll leave that fiction away. I'll note another interesting fictional thing. Treacle Walker by Alan Garner by Fourth Estate got shortlisted for the Booker, and even the literary folks I know said long overdue, but it's very Garner. And in retrospect, Garner is a really good writer on tradition and folklore and how they permeate the present. And Treacle Walker is, again, his theme is very much Cheshire. 2 people I know were really, who are intelligent readers, were really puzzled by this book, but they hadn't read any Garner before. I think it's not his best, but it was interesting that I suspect M. John Harrison was responsible for getting this into the Booker shortlist. He
was one of the judges for the Booker this year. Yeah, and
he's got interesting tastes. But that's I think the best discussion of the book that makes sense is more in the late and Lamented Maureen Kincaid's Speller in Strange Horizons. That, if you read that'll give the book sense. So interesting, but not worth mentioning, but not a top one. Okay, now I'm going to Australiana history. Now, true crime, 2 books here. Rachel Franks, this is New South Press. It's called An Uncommon Hangman. Now, I know Franks, so I'm a little bit biased. But I asked to review this one because I thought, okay, I think this is interesting. So, Nosy Bob was the long-standing hangman in New South Wales. He got the nickname because he had no nose. He had trouble finding a job, even as a cabman. So he ended up as the hangman. And her treatment of this is really interesting in that she writes it from the hangings, what he did, all of them. She looks at all his hangings. And he had a huge track record. He hanged a couple of people who were associated with George Fortune, which is why I was very interested in the book. What it adds up in is it's a very powerful argument about capital punishment and what it does to people. Nosy Hangman, luckily for him, was a loner because nobody wanted to have a drink with him because of what he did.
Yeah.
But he was also very good at his job, and he wanted to have humane deaths. So he'd weigh people and he'd look at the ropes. But there were occasions when he got nervous and he made an absolute muck of it, and those people died appallingly. I thought that was probably one of the most inventive reactions to treatment of true crime that I'd read in a long time. The other one I'm going to mention is, again, inventive. It's Alan Unwin, Dallin Dufty, Ned Kelly. And this book is called Nabbing Ned Kelly. And what this does is that this is looking at the police view of Ned Kelly, because you get Ned Kelly as outlaw. And what you don't get is, all right, there was a royal commission into the police because they really made a mess of it. But that was the top brass. And so I'm interested in this because Ned Kelly was very influential on George Fortune, because Ned Kelly was a hero to villains of the time, and George Fortune and his gang actually claimed to be members of the Kelly gang at one stage during a bank robbery, which got them into a lot of trouble.
I would have. This
actually takes the approach of the ordinary cops, how they were dealing with it, and also looking at the problem of informers, which was rife. It comes out largely in the people know about Aaron Sherritt, who is Ned Kelly's pal, relative, and how he was killed. But looking at other informers, and particularly someone who was on the, someone who was feeding the police misinformation, who I hadn't heard of, who was a local school teacher. It's sort of concentrating on the mess that the police made of it because the top brass were in competition, and also the two superintendents. Both the top brass wanted the glory of getting Ned Kelly, so they're actively undermining each other. And this came out at the Royal Commission, and Dufty takes the attitude that the real hero was a detective called Mick Ward, who was Irish and who knew the area. And what he did was he grew a big beard, and he went undercover, and he recruited informers. So he laid down the groundwork, and he did a lot of hard work, which he didn't get credit for. And so this is the story of Mick Ward, which is just a detective doing his job. And so that's an aspect that I was really interested in, because Mick Ward was called in to be part of the detective team that was dealing with George Fortune and his bank robbery gang.
Connections all over the place.
Absolutely. It's all interconnected. But this book is a really rattling read because Dufty knows how to structure the narrative so that you've got... And he knows how to build suspense. So when you were sending the trains up to Glenrowan, they had to, first of all, to get the Seamus train up to steaming point, which means delaying and delaying while they got, basically fired up the engines. And then when they start off, they can't afford to lose any time, so that they barrel through the boom gates. They crash through the boom gates.
Okay.
So it reads like it would make a fantastic film, but it's not fashionable by any means, because it's not Ned Kelly's hero.
So it's a non-fiction.
Non-fiction.
So it's a piece of non-fiction, but it's written with a novelist's eye.
Yeah, exactly like Adrian Hyland's book from a few years back on the bushfires, and he wrote it because he knew one of the cops at Kinglake, so it was Kinglake 457 from memory. And so it was written with a crime writer's appreciator of house structure, and so, it just keeps you reading.
Just another quick point about Ned Kelly, was something that I just read recently. John Monash met Ned Kelly.
Wow.
Because John Monash was he was born in Jerilderie, and he happened to be in Jerilderie at the time that Ned Kelly was there holding up in the bank. And the story is that he met Ned Kelly in the street. He was only about 13 or 14 at the time. This is Monash, not Kelly, of course. And Monash was very impressed with him, thought he was a very impressive man, and remembered him all the way right through. So that's a peculiar thing that I came across just recently. So. And
there's another connection with Jerilderie, because Mary Fortune's second husband, Percy Brett, who was on the police and then became a squatter, he was in the bank, and he's one of the hostages.
Oh, there you go.
And she possibly knew this, so interconnections anywhere.
Yep.
So very quickly on to the next bit of biographical, interesting, recreational reading. This is a book that's been out a few years, and it's called Polly Plum. It's from New Zealand, Otago University Press, from Jenny Coleman. My sister gave me this. Now, Polly Plum was the pseudonym of Mary Ann Colclough, who was an Englishwoman who emigrated to New Zealand. On the way, her brother died. She was obliged to support herself as a governess when she arrived in New Zealand. She married, and her husband died, left her with 2 young children. And she was obliged to go back to teaching to support them, which turned her into an activist and also a journalist. And her pseudonym was Polly Plum. Just the amount of crap she had that was thrown at her just because she was a woman and she was entering the public realm, which women were not supposed to do in the 19th century, despite the British Empire being headed by a woman, Queen Victoria. But she was really good on what she knew from personal was women's rights, but she was also interested in prison reform and women's housing, single women's. And she came to Victoria at one point, and she wrote for the Herald. Well, this isn't particularly covered in this book, whose focus is New Zealand, was very much interested to see that she wrote A Lady's Visit to Pentridge in 1875, got into the notorious A division in Pentridge where the guys were masked and forced to sleep on wooden floors. And to do that, you really had to be determined if you're also a woman.
Yes, I would have thought so.
And wrote a really good piece of journalism, which, okay, I'm a bloody-minded researcher. I just went, after I'd read the book, I went looking for what else about her journalism. And this isn't mentioned in the book, but I thought, okay, I think that piece of journalism influenced Mary Fortune, who also did a visit to Pentridge, only it was to visit her son 4 years later, and wrote about it. All right, another non-fiction which is really good, and I'm only going to mention this in passing, is Julie Phillips, The Baby on the Fire Escape, Creativity, Motherhood and the Mind-Baby Problem. Now, Phillips is James Tiptree Jr.'s biographer. She's also writing a biography of Ursula Le Guin. She's the official biographer. Now, Tiptree didn't have any children to her, not her fault. She had an abortion that she got an infection from abortion. Le Guin had children and regarded children and as a joint project with her husband and her writing. And how do you balance creativity with motherhood? So she's looking at anybody from artists Alice Neal to Angela Carter, taking in quite a range of people, not all white nor het nor in conventional relations like the US figure Audre Lorde, and some were what we'd call good mothers and some were what we'd call bad mothers, but I don't really have space to talk about this, but it's an interesting examination of how they managed and their various responses. I thought this was an outstanding book on the topic of which is an area which is quite well covered, and I'm looking forward to Phillips' discussion book on Le Guin, which I think is going to be ace. All right, where are we going? All right, I'll leave out science fiction and fantasy because the one book I really did read in this area. I didn't read very much, and one book, my top chart would be about 7.5 out of 10, and I think that's not really good. That's not what I go. I'll just get on to crime and finish. One of the first ones up is a book that Perry recommended and gave me a copy, which is Laidlaw, William McIlvaney. And this is the book that kicked off Tartan Noir because he was a respected literary novelist in Scotland and I think also poet.
Couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah. Also son of another McIlvaney, who's a crime novelist of note as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is really interesting because if you go back to Jekyll and Hyde, that was in some respects Stevenson's. It's read as a fantasy or but it's actually a crime novel.
Yep.
So that in a sense is the progenitor, and there's also there's a few other books in this area, but this kicks off Tartan Noir. And certainly it's a huge influence on Rankin. And I'm going to be heretical here, and I think that Laidlaw, on the evidence of this, I read a couple of Rankins after I read the Laidlaw, and I thought, well, it's not derivative, but they've got different approaches. And McIlvaney, it's interesting talking about Laidlaws. It's detective-centred, but it's not a whodunit. It's a form called the How Catchem, which existed parallel to the whodunit, and for a long time the How Catchem was pretty much the dominant form. The whodunit eventually took over. But
so by the How Catchem, you're saying that is this a situation where the lead detective or whoever the lead character is pretty much certain who the culprit is? The perpetrator of whatever crime it is they're investigating, and then it's just a matter of trying to work out how they can get all the information together. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and that all the reader knows.
Oh, right. Okay. So this is the classic of television one for this would be Columbo, wouldn't it? Where basically he knows pretty much within 5 minutes of the start of the program who it is, and he's just got to basically work his way through to getting all the information to actually tie it all up. Yeah, that's pretty much what happens with this one in particular, I remember.
The other thing is that I actually went and read it twice, which I don't do lightly, because I wanted to see how he done it. Mm-hmm. Who done it, how done it.
Yep.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that, while you think the plot meanders, it doesn't. It's very, very tight. One bit of information leads to another bit, but if you're lightly reading, you think, how did so-and-so know that? And then you go back and you look at it, oh, yes. And here's the difference that I'd say between him and Rankin. It all fits in perfectly in place. It's like a mosaic, and it's a very rich mosaic because the whole subject is Edinburgh as it was in the 70s.
Yep.
So you get minor so you get a girl and you get who's murdered. Okay, she's murdered by a gay bloke. You know that fairly early on. And yes, you could regard this as anti-gay, but it's actually sympathetic for the time. Mm. At the same time, then you get another minor character who's a minor crim who wants to be a hard man, and he's going to fail terribly because he's just an idiot. So you've got the parallel stories, Laidlaw, who's this damaged detective, but he's good at his job. But then you get also the crims who actually want this solved because it's going to bring disrespect upon their patch. And so they're characters too. So there's no obtrusive bits, there's no unresolved ends. Like, I was reading a Rankin, And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a character who's leaping out of the page, but it's never sort of tied up. Or you mentioned this bit of popular culture mythology, but that's never resolved. So it's tight. It's incredibly tight, but you don't realise it. So
and it has the added advantage of being short.
Oh yes,
This is sort of a 1970s novel, and what are we? 200 and how many odd pages? 240 odd.
224 pages. He does not waste a word.
No. So this is the classic idea of, that it had to fit into a certain length, and there you are. And you can do a lot in that length. You don't have to go to 500 pages to sort of cover every single little bit that you think that you need to cover. No, I thought that was an excellent novel.
The other one other crime one I'm going to mention is, again, I think Julian just brought this home. He'd heard that Jean-Patrick Monchet was an interesting writer, French, dead. Again, this is a 1970s novel. Monchet was probably the most formally innovative French writer of his time. He died in the 1980s, I think. And leftist, part of the Situationist Internationale, which Situationist was very influential on punk, particularly visually. But he's a critic, but he's also Marxist, translator, wanted to be a scriptwriter, so did what Fergus Hume did, write a few books to see if he can draw attention to himself. Mm-hmm. Again, short. Now, this one, and what he was writing what he called the neo-polar. Now, that doesn't make sense unless you know that polo is what the French called thrillers. So he's updating the thriller. This one his publishers rejected it because it was thought too experimental, and it's Fatale. The publisher apparently thought it was too literary. What it's about is about a female serial killer. Okay,
unusual.
And it's very stripped down, and it's got a real film sensibility. You can see this is absolutely crying out to be made a film. This woman who appears out of nowhere, murders blokes.
Yep.
Goes and I have to say this is probably one of the most formally original crime novels I've ever read.
So when was it published?
1977.
Right, okay.
And you get the sense of it was 1977, the world was about to change.
Set in France?
Yeah, set in France, regional France, and which is very hidebound. You get the gentry, and then you get the municipal blokes with their power, their little fiefdoms.
Yep.
You get a sense that the kingdom is about to crumble. And how he expresses it is in this woman who's killing men. Unfortunately, I was doing that all from memory and a bit of research because I can't find it. It's in the house somewhere.
I know that problem.
Yeah, final book. All right, this is a review book. After Sappho by Sylvie Wynne Schwartz, American writer. Now, this got longlisted for the Booker, whereupon people started giving it a lot of attention. In my opinion, it should have been at least shortlisted, and I know people who agree with me absolutely. What it's most like is a book a few years back called Square Haunting, which looked at a geographic spot in London and all the women women writers who were associated with it, from Virginia Woolf to Dorothy L. Sayers to a few have been forgotten. And it was and they weren't there concurrently and they didn't necessarily know each other. This is similar in that it's a novel about the women activists, again, activist women is the theme here, but they were Sappho's being translated, and they're all very influenced by Sappho. So these are suffragettes, but they're also lesbians trying to work out lesbian identity in a period where homosexuality wasn't what you were, it was what you did. And famously, women couldn't be prosecuted in England for being lesbians because they couldn't define the act, or allegedly they couldn't dare to explain it to Queen Victoria. In my humble opinion, Queen Victoria probably knew very well what women did.
I think so.
Yeah, so it's like artist Romaine Brooks, Sarah Bernhardt, Colette. Those I knew about. I didn't know sort of Eileen Gray, Lena Paletti. It's very, very, it's poetic, but it's given that so much of Sappho exists in fragments, because, again, survival of Greek poetry was fragmentary, sometimes with some writers and sometimes it wasn't, particularly those who are maybe a bit out there, which Sappho was. But given that it's a novel that really holds the attention, and it's chronological and fragmentary, but it's really hard. You can't stop it, can't stop reading it. Really well written. So it begins, we were going to be Sappho. Who was Sappho? No one knew, but she had an island. She was garlanted with girls. She could sit down to dine and look straight at the women she loved, however unhappily. We read Sappho at school in classes intended to teach poetic metre. Very few of our teachers imagined that they were learning other stuff. Yeah, I really thought this was probably my best of the year.
Okay.
For a literary experimental novel that is impeccably researched and yet doesn't drown you in it.
Because it sounds from your description of it that it could come across as quite dry, but obviously it isn't. It's really quite a page turner, which is a bit odd.
It's evocative. It's got a sense of place, Greece. It's sensuous. And it's got sort of recurring characters. So you can follow the characters if I like. But that was, again, something I got for review. It was just in a bundle of books that Steger parcelled up and sent to me. As I say, while I was reviewing it, the Booker short long listing came up and I managed to get that into the review.
Okay.
So
fortuitous.
Fortuitous indeed.
All right.
And on that note,
all right.
I will stop.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lucy. It sounds like a really good eclectic and diverse range of books you have there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Perry.
Thanks, Lucy. Very much appreciated. Wonderful stuff as usual. We always hear some interesting titles coming out of there. And I was also pleased to hear that one of the books that I gave her was on her in her top 5 of the year. So that was a bit unusual. It was an old paperback of mine that I read, and asked her whether she wanted a copy of it or wanted it. She took it and really enjoyed it.
Good.
So that was the Laidlaw by William McIlvaney, an early Glasgow police procedural from the 1970s. Excellent book. Excellent indeed. I reckon we're done for this particular episode, David. I think we've certainly been talking for long enough, and thanks to Lucy for helping us out. So, what are we up to next time?
Well, just what we've been reading, because we've had best of segments, both the previous episode and this one. I've got a pile of books that I've read and talked about in other venues, but we've never talked about them on the podcast. So we'll get to some of those next time. And I've read some excellent books.
So have I. So I shall be talking about some of those as well. And bit of a forecast coming up. The episode after that will be talking about crime fiction. So next episode will have no crime in it at all, other than the fact the crime of us producing a podcast. And that's it. All right. Okay, that'll be it. Thanks, David.
No,
I think we're done.
I'll see you next time.
All right, see you later, David.
Bye.